Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And the 2043 season is now underway. Just lost on opening day, 2-1 to the Expos in our last episode. So, time to get this season started in earnest. Definitely feels like it could be a bit of a transition year for our Buffalo Wings. Over the last few years, we've moved on from three very important starting pitchers: Juan Estrada, Sincere Shazier, and most recently Alexis Mendoza, who moved on as a free agent this past offseason. Longtime superstar Deshaun Seifu is likely nearing the end of his career, and we've got 2 seasons left with Mr. Rojas, the first baseman who we signed to a 4-year, $120 million contract 2 seasons ago. So feel like it's going to be a somewhat different team this year than it has been in previous seasons. Still expect to make the playoffs, but if it is a situation where things go sideways on us, the positive thing is that we don't have a lot of long-term salary commitments at this point, particularly expensive long-term salary commitments. So not intending that we need to go into rebuild or retool mode, but just being realistic. If it does happen, feel like we're in a pretty good situation where we don't have a lot of dangerous, long, bad potential contracts on the books. Couple big things we're going to be focused on in this upcoming episode as we play through the first couple months of the season. Alejandro Contreras, the young second baseman, is still out another 2 or 3 weeks. Once he's back and does a brief, likely rehab assignment in AAA, have to figure out whether we want to put him on the major league team or let him stay down for a while. And if we do bring him up to the major league team, obviously that's going to require letting go of somebody or sending someone to the minors, which could be an interesting decision for us. And then the other thing we're going to be following is Deshaun Seifu and his quest for 3,000 hits. Now stands 78 away after having a single in 4 at-bats in the opening day loss. Seifu is certainly no longer what he used to be. His contact and his gap power are lower than they were in the past. He's even started to lose a little bit of his speed and his base running proficiency. And defensively, he's nowhere near the player he once was. This is a guy who won gold gloves for us at second base almost 15 years ago at this point, and then spent a long part of his career as a solid defensive second baseman, moved to third base recently. And this year, he is actually a designated hitter for us because of his defensive limitations. We know he's not, in terms of his batting profile, your prototypical or perhaps even an ideal defense designated hitter. But as he pursues 3,000 hits, for the time being, he's going to be our leadoff hitter in DH, and we're going to continue trying to get him as many at-bats as possible as an excellent career by our captain is winding down. And the last thing we'll be monitoring is how a couple of our young starting pitchers do. We noted that we moved on from Alexis Mendoza this past offseason when he left as a free agent. And we also moved Floyd Auclair into our stopper role. So the 24-year-old Chris Lott, who was our first-round draft pick back in 2037, is going to get a chance to make his major league debut in a few days as our number 4 starter. And then international free agent signing from 2037, Simeon Minelli, after pitching briefly in the majors in September of last year, is going to get a shot as our number 5 starter. So a couple of youngsters in the rotation with limited experience. Feel real good about Barajas and Lance as our 1-2 starters. Barbarito has had more mixed results over the course of his career with us, but the last few seasons has been pretty solid, so think he's likely up to the task of becoming our 3rd starter this year. And in the early days of this season, we have signed a couple additional players to minor league contracts, most notably Bobby Bolig. He was with us in the minors a year ago and ended up coming up to the majors. He was looking for $10-11 million throughout the off season. Ended up, when the season started, lowering his demands. Minor league contract with a $2 million salary if he makes it onto the major league team. He does have the ability to leave us after 30 days if he's not added to the roster. We will put him in AAA Albany, see what he can do for us there. Still think he is a potentially useful left-handed hitter against right-handed pitching at the age of 35, soon to be 36. Still has pretty good speed, so it's not implausible that we see a similar scenario to a year ago when he spent most of the year in Albany for us after he couldn't find a major league deal, and then we did bring him up in August and September, and he was on the postseason roster. He's still a good hitter. So if we have some injury issues, or if we just decide he's the best option available down the line, Bolig could once again be in our future. And after that 0-2 start, the Wings have started playing a bit better, 4-1 over our last 5, so we finished the first week of the season at 4-3, thanks in no small part to Luis Coma-Duran, 12 for 27 the first week of the season with 3 homers, 5 runs scored, and 12 runs driven in. So the outfielder is off to a very good start here in 2043. And we've made it through the first month of the season, 13-10 record for the Buffalo Wings, 4th in the NL East, but only half a game behind. So as you can see from the standings here, a very tight race with 5 teams separated by 1 game. Looking at the leaderboards in the National League, not a lot going on for our Buffalo Wings in terms of league leaders, including notably Deshaun Seifu not being on the stolen bases leaderboard. Do have some positive news, though. The rookie Simeon Manelli, National League Rookie of the Month, 2 wins and no losses, 1.93 ERA over 23 1/3 innings. Taking a bit deeper look into our team statistics here 1 month into the season, that 13-10 record is right in line with Pythagorean expectations, tied for 5th in the National League in runs scored, which we'd be very content with if we finish the season in the top handful of scoring teams in the National League. 5th in the National League in runs allowed, though, and after having one of the premier pitching staffs in the National League over the last decade, that's a little bit of a surprise. Interestingly, though, our starters' ERA is 3rd, despite the youngsters' bullpen ERA is 10th in the National League right now. I'm not going to get deep into the stats yet because it is early going, but we'll look at a couple things. The 2 left-handed hitters whose spots could be in jeopardy if it's time to bring Contreras back from his AAA rehab assignment. Edgar Canales, the homegrown player, 278 average with a homer and 9 ribbies in 18 at-bats. So he has been very productive in limited playing time. Jamie Zlato, the Rule 5 acquisition, 0 for 1 with only 1 walk. So given his defensive limitations, not someone that we've been using very much. And he likely will be the odd man out once Contreras is ready to come back. He's now played 5 games. Last time I checked in on him, he was 0 for 5 in his first 2 games, so he has at least gone 2 for 10 in his last few games. Hopefully has shaken all the rust off after being hurt for about a month and missing the last week or 2 of spring training. Probably ready to go, which could be a bad situation for Mr. Zlato's future with our organization. Check in on the living legend, Deshaun Seifu, and what he's doing, and he's hanging in there, hitting .278 this year, 22 hits already, 5 steals in 6 attempts. He's not running at nearly the frequency that he did in the past, with his speed dipping to 65 and his stealing rating dipping to 70. Still don't have him way down. He's only one tick away from the most frequent base stealer. But given that we do expect the division to be somewhat competitive this year, it's not just going to be all about generating stolen bases for Mr. Seifu. It would be great and cool if he could lead the league in steals for his 16th consecutive year. I think the probability of that happening is pretty low, even if we do crank his steals up all the way. So at this point, we want him to continue being efficient on the base paths and hopefully being successful over 80% of the time, as he has been in these early stages of the 2043 season. And 57 hits away from 3,000 now here on May 1st for Mr. Seifu. And as we think about whether we want to bring Mr. Contreras back up, I want to check in on how a few players are doing. Jim Andrews is our starting shortstop. Don't think with his solid defensive skills, his spot's in jeopardy. And he's also hitting .293 this year with a 115 WRC+. Ramiro Medina, the young third baseman, hitting just .225, 4 doubles and a homer and 80 at-bats. So he's definitely not hit great thus far. Still has some room to develop, but he's playing every day in the majors. Could go either way on him. It would not be the worst thing in the world to have either a Whitehead or a Medina or a Contreras, who is in AAA right now, to have at least one of those guys in the minors. I think just from a team building perspective, right now they're all kind of on pace to go through their arbitration years basically at the same time. Would not mind if we had that staggered a little bit to get an extra year at the major league minimum, for instance, perhaps out of Contreras if we keep him down a little bit longer. And we could do the same thing to just kind of stagger when they'll start making more and more money, since they are largely fungible players in my view. Whitehead, if he's not hitting, to me is the one who maybe we send to the minors. Fortunately, he's hitting really well. 346 average, a homer and 10 ribbies in 78 at-bats, a 138 WRC+. Small sample size, clearly, and don't expect him to hit that way over the course of the season, but pleased with the job he's done. Looking at that and thinking that we're going to get Medina regular playing time up at the major league level, Zlato's spot definitely could be in jeopardy. We're just not using him at all, really. And he doesn't bring much to the table defensively, where once we have Contreras on board, then with Whitehead, Andrews, Medina, and Contreras, we've got 4 guys to mix and match at short, third, and second, and a very good defensive option if we pinch hit for one of those guys with someone like Canales, for instance, which gives our team a little more offensive and defensive flexibility. But I think at least for the near term, with a team that's playing not great, but well at the major league level, we're going to keep Contreras down in AAA. One of the things we've struggled with due to his low adaptability and work ethic is trying to make him as accomplished as possible in being able to kind of play somewhere besides second base competently at the major league level, which he does have the skill to do. So we've been forced starting him for these first 5 games at third base. Kind of will continue playing him there for the time being. He still also has the opportunity, we think, to get a little better in some of these skills, but at 27 years old, given the lack of real traction that he's gained over the last few years in terms of improving, and the low work ethic and adaptability that we mentioned, I think he probably is what he is at this point in as far as his ratings, but still going to play him down here every day, see if maybe he can get a little better at third base, and then maybe move him to first or short. If we have some injuries, or if the team starts going on a skid, or if a Medina, for instance, has his batting average drop to 170 or something, then we'd consider making a swap. But for the time being, Still got one option year left for Contreras at this point, but with 1 year and 137 days of major league service, we could potentially sneak an extra year out of him at the major league minimum if he gets a decent amount of service time in AAA this year that's not at the major league level. And we just heard from our buddy Juan Romero, who you may remember has led the team in ribbies all 4 seasons he's been with us. We were willing to let him hit free agency this past offseason because he was looking for a very long contract that we weren't inclined to give him into his late 30s. And then fortunately for us, he ended up signing a qualifying offer for $18.9 million. He did just ask us to start talking turkey with him on a contract. He's looking for 8 years, close to $20 million a year. Given that I'm not exactly sure what we want this team to look like down the line, still reticent to make that type of long-term commitment to Mr. Romero right now. So I think we're just going to let him play out this season and figure out what to do with him down the line. I don't feel great about making that long term of a commitment to him. And we've now got our first significant injury of the major league season. And if you had Mitch Houlihan in the injury pool, you've been paying attention to the last few years. The catcher, who's fragile physically, going to be out with a sprained thumb for 6 to 7 weeks, was hitting just .203 this year, which is certainly not a vintage Mitch Houlihan offensive season. This is a guy who over 1,500 at-bats in the majors is a career .300 hitter. So a disappointing result there. The positive thing is that it'll let us play the young Mr. Ramirez every day at catcher. Ramirez hitting .234 and 47 at-bats, has been splitting time with Houlihan. Ramirez starting against lefties, Houlihan starting against righties 2 out of every 3 days. Now Ramirez will likely be the everyday starter, which will likely give him some good playing time and some good practice to hopefully continue honing his skills and hopefully improving that bat a bit. And Bobby Bolig has opted out of his contract after 30 days, but we've offered him a minor league contract with a $100,000 bonus to join us. And Walt Miller, former starting catcher and backup catcher more recently for us, also on the market. With the injury to Houlihan, we offered him a minor league contract with a $120,000 bonus. Obviously, he won't be the guy that we're bringing up to replace Houlihan right now since he's not on our roster, but think that getting both of these guys locked up for the rest of the season to minor league deals certainly would improve our organizational depth, which is important given that although we're struggling a bit more recently at 16-14, 2.5 games back, still certainly view the Buffalo Wings as a potential playoff team this year. And we did get both Bobby Bolig and Walt Miller signed to those deals, so we've got them in the minors the rest of this year. Put them both on AAA. In the case of Bolig, put him back in AAA. Didn't put Miller on the major league roster. We promoted Jarrett Obenchain, who is a guy who we picked up in a trade with Miami several years ago and has been in our minors. Solid defensive catcher, good in the clubhouse, durable, not the greatest bat in the world, but not sure that his bat isn't better than Miller's at this point. Was hitting .296 and 81 at-bats in AAA. So going to give him the opportunity to back up Mr. Ramirez, at least for the next few weeks. We've probably got about 2 months until Houlihan will be ready. So if things don't work out with Obenchain, once Miller gets a little seasoning in AAA, we could certainly make that switch as well. And we've made it now to the beginning of June. 27-24 record, 5 games behind. We were kind of right up there with the Nationals and Expos, but you can see we're 4-6 over our last 10. Well, both of those teams are 7-3, so that's dropped us back a little bit to third place in the NL East, 5 games back. And right now we are half a game up on the Mets for the final wild card spot in the National League. Coma Duran hitting .287, 12 homers, 32 ribbies. The 12 home runs ranks third in the National League for Luis. Pitching-wise, still nobody on the leaderboard. Check in on the team statistically, and the 27-24 record is 3 games behind Pythagorean expectations, so hopefully that will normalize a bit. You can see we're 5-10 in one-run games, 500 in the month of May after being 3 games over in April. The offense has kind of regressed back towards more where I thought we might be, in the middle of the pack, 10th in the league in runs scored. But while that's been happening, the pitching has improved. We now rank 2nd in the National League in runs allowed. Solid defensive team, and we're also tied for 3rd in stolen bases. Take a quick look at some statistics here, and the pitching staff, as far as the rotation, doing well. Barajas and Lance and Barbarito, all kind of doing as expected. The record with Barbarito of 3-6 is not incredible, but the 3.02 ERA is solid. And Lott 4-4 with a 3.28 ERA, and Manelli 4-0 with a 2.72 ERA, both doing well. Manelli doesn't have that incredible stamina, so not involved in a ton of decisions, but has been pretty useful to us. Joe Scott, a bit of an off year so far, put up a 4.50 ERA over 22 innings of work, although he has struck out 33 batters. I think that will normalize, and we have gotten 47 2/3 innings from Floyd Auclair in the stopper role. The 4.15 ERA, certainly higher than I would have anticipated, but a ridiculous 78 strikeouts for him in those 47 2/3 innings. 1-2 record, 12 holds. His whip is 1.05. The issue, you can see it blinking loudly right there, is that he's given up 9 home runs in 47 2/3 innings, with the really good movement on his pitches, and the fact that each of the previous 2 years in the AL and then with us in the NL, he had given up only 10 home runs in 150 plus innings, makes me think it's probably just a bit of bad luck, and hopefully we'll get a better performance from him going forward. Outside of Robbie Farrell with a 7.56 ERA and very limited usage of just 8 1/3 innings, the rest of the bullpen is doing pretty well. Turning to our offensive players, and we will have a decision to make. Jim Andrews just got banged up, going to be out 2 to 3 weeks with chronic back soreness. The shortstop hitting .259. That will likely mean that it's going to be time to bring Mr. Contreras up from AAA. We'll take a look. Last I had checked in, Alejandro was not doing well. He hasn't gotten any better in terms of his proficiency to play third. He has gotten the batting average up over 200, though, 216 now in 88 at-bats. Last time I checked in on him, he was still on the interstate, so hitting a little better, but we'll certainly bring him up. Would think that most likely Whitehead will pivot over to shortstop, probably play Contreras at second, and continue to play Medina at third base while Andrews is hurt. That's meant that Jamie Zlato continues to hold on to that roster spot. 2 for 7 with a home run and a double, so both of his hits, extra base hits. Probably well on his way here on June 1st with only 7 at-bats on the season to setting some type of record for the fewest at-bats on a season by someone who was on the roster for all 162 games if he does end up spending the entire year with us. But at least he's made the most of the little limited efforts he had, the little limited opportunities he's had. Once Andrews is healthy again and Houlihan is healthy again. Going to have some interesting decisions to make, but for the time being, he holds on to the roster spot. You can see stolen bases. Seifu's not even leading the team, only 8 on the year at this point. Ishmael Velasco, the batting average is dipped to 241. He is 10 of 12 on the base paths. And Deshaun Seifu hitting 284. So the batting average is solid. He's hitting that 80% mark we wanted him to be with stolen bases. 8 of 10 on the year, 48 hits total at this point. So as we sit here on June 1st, 31 hits away from 3,000 for Mr. Seifu, but it seems increasingly likely with 8 stolen bases here on June 1st that Mr. Seifu will not be leading the National League in steals for a 16th consecutive year. Joe O'Hara of the Mets has 19. And as I said, we haven't totally turned it off, so I think there just haven't been a lot of opportunities. He's only 1 tick from the maximum, but given that his speed is down a tick and his stealing rating is down a tick, I think it was prudent to limit his opportunities a bit, even though it will just kind of confirm for us that he's not going to ultimately catch Ricky in career steals, and his streak of leading the league in steals will probably end at 15. And we're at the midway point of June, June 15th, so we're less than a week away from the draft at this point. Houlihan's recovery not going as well as expected. Uncertain return date from that strained thumb at this point. So unclear when he will be back. Andrus is healthy as of today, so we'll have a roster decision to make there. Record is 34-29. Good news is we're second in the NL East after winning 7 in a row, playing our best baseball of the season recently. Bad news is we're still 8 games behind the Nationals, who have the best record in all of baseball at 42-21. But we are a game and a half up on the final wild card spot now, so that's a little more positive with this strong play of late. Hopefully we can have another good week before we get to the draft and take a look at the top prospects who will be available for us before we finish off this episode. And with Andrus ready to come back, I think the clock has finally struck midnight on Jamie Zlato. Ended up 2 for 8 in his 8 at-bats over 10 games played through the middle of June. But with Bobby Bolig waiting in AAA if we need another left-handed hitter, and the fact that we also have Jake Spring, another good veteran left-handed bat in AAA, continuing to spend a roster spot on a guy who is basically not usable because Canales gets the left-handed pinch hitting at-bats before him, and he's hitting 280 with a 123 WRC+. I think it makes sense to try to bolster our infield defense a bit at this point. So we will go ahead and release Jamie Zlato back to the Cubs. That will allow us to move Andrus back on to the roster, and that will give us somewhat more versatility in terms of how we can play things out in the infield. Taking a look at where the team stands here on June 15th, not a ton of home runs. Coma Duran with 13, Medina with 7, the young third baseman, and then Porter with 6. But you'll note that Rojas and Romero, who are typically our 4th and 5th hitters, don't show up on the home run board. Fortunately, Romero with 29 ribbies is second on the team in ribbies. You can see a little bit of a burst from Seifu recently. He certainly intends to lead the team in steals, even if he can't lead the league in steals at this point. 274 average, still right at that 80% mark, 12 out of 15 on the base paths this year. And sitting here on June 15th, 20 hits away from 3,000 for Deshaun Seifu. And we've made it now to the first year player draft. Interesting, since we last checked in, ended up getting swept in the 3-game series in Atlanta before taking 3 out of 4 on the road in Philadelphia. So as we take a look at the standings here, still in second place in the NL East, 10 games behind the Nationals, who continue to have the best record in baseball. And we're 1 game up on the Expos for the final wild card spot. So definitely not a perfect season by any stretch of the imagination, 70 games in. Mike Whitehead, the young second baseman, somewhat inexplicably third in the National League with a .330 batting average. Still nobody on the team on the leaderboards in terms of pitching categories this year. But right now we're going to turn our focus from this year to the future, because it is time for the first year player draft. Our Buffalo Wings with the 32nd pick. Taking a look at the draft order, though, we do also have the 38th pick, the final first round compensatory pick for the loss of Alexis Mendoza that we talked about earlier. So I won't be picking until number 32, but we'll end up with 2 picks out of 9. That math doesn't work. 2 picks out of, yeah, it does work. 32nd and it looks like 38th. Okay, that does make sense. I was looking at these guys like these were picks. I can do simple math. So 2 out of 7 picks with numbers 32 and numbers 38 coming up for Buffalo. The pool this year, a lot of pretty highly regarded batters. As you can see, the top end pitching a bit light. It'll be interesting to see what, if anything, is around for us at the 32nd pick. So we will auto draft until we are up, and now we'll take a look at some of the top prospects that are available. You can see pitching wise, it does look like a lot of relievers out there. Jeff Thomas certainly looks like a potentially very good relief pitcher, but definitely a reliever. Kadir Aguillard, another guy who is definitely a reliever, but potentially really good stuff. Juan Canela, 17-year-old, another guy who is definitely a reliever. Mike Jaramillo, 22-year-old out of San Diego State, another reliever there. Dana McIntyre, looks like he's got some pretty negative personality traits with the low leadership, loyalty, work ethic, and intelligence. Another pure reliever out of Butler. David Razzo. He's a guy who, in theory, is a starter. Going to need that slider to develop, but he's durable, high work ethic, pretty good stamina, pretty good holding runners. Committed to Tulane. Doesn't look like he is maybe an ace of a rotation, but he could be a pretty good pitcher. Particularly if that slider develops, he could be a pretty interesting starter with that good stamina, excellent at holding on runners, durability, and he's 18 years old, already throwing in the mid to high 90s. So Razzo certainly is an interesting prospect, looking for a lot of money over slot, but still somebody to certainly consider. And then Dan Russell, another guy who is a pure reliever. So if we were going to go with one of these guys that we've just looked at quickly, I think Razzo is probably the guy that we like the most. Whether we take him now or hope that $6 million demand lets him fall a little bit further is something that's in question. But certainly don't expect that I would be going with any of the relievers with the 32nd pick in the draft, with the big number of them on the board right now. Even if we wanted to take a reliever, I'd probably wait another 6 picks till 38. But whether or not that will make sense kind of depends on what the high-end position players who are available look like. And we'll start with a couple of college-y looking players. Only the guys that we say are 2 stars. Center fielder Alex Cole, durable out of Long Beach State. Solid defensively. Looks like he could have an interesting-ish bat. Not the worst prospect in the world. And then another center fielder, Joe Allen Jr. out of Navy. Really good range, good bunter, decent speed. The bat's a little bit of a question at this point at the age of 22. Take a look at the somewhat higher end prospects now, and it looks like all of these guys are high school players. Arfeni Perkins, 17-year-old right fielder. That potential 70 home run power and 70 I is certainly interesting. Going to strike out a ton. Question is whether he'll make enough contact to make it worthwhile. Left-handed bat, corner outfielder, a couple positive personality traits. Certainly someone to consider. Chris Niket, a center fielder out of Vancouver, Washington. Another guy with pretty impressive potential home run power. Good outfield range, decent speed, right-handed hitter. Decent eye, but not quite as good as what we had with Perkins. Think I'd lean to Perkins over Niket. Tim Kuhn, corner outfielder, like the high work ethic, like the durability, but not all that exciting as a prospect. Looks like he could be a borderline useful hitter. Catcher, Kurt Kelsey, is not someone to just throw out. Like the high work ethic, competent defensively, got a little pop in his bat with some home run power and a decent eye. Looks like he could make decent contact, and he's also a switch hitting catcher. So Kelsey and Perkins are probably my 2 favorites so far. Gianco Harris, a third baseman. Like some of the personality traits, like the durability, not a lot of speed. Decent range, not really an ideal arm for a third baseman. It does have a little bit of pop and a decent eye, a little older at 18 years old. And then there are 2 4-star potential prospects who head up the list of everyday players available. Second baseman Josh Hoffman. Like the durability, and for a middle infielder, it's a potentially interesting bat. Doesn't have much speed and is really not ideal in terms of his traits as an infielder. Looks like he could play left field or center field in a pinch if you needed him. Interesting bat, like the durability. Lefty hitter. I'd say he's in the mix, but I don't love him. And then Dave Garner, a left fielder, another guy with very limited speed, doesn't bring really anything positive to the table defensively. Some real negative personality traits with that low leadership and work ethic, and a interesting-ish bat with potentially plus contact and plus home run power, as well as a decent eye. To me, Garner, Hoffman, Kelsey, and Perkins are the 4 that I'm most interested in. I'll spend more time with some of the players offline on these other screens. I guess I can throw a bone to those of you who like to get into a little more detail than I normally provide, and maybe look at the batting potential here, see if there's anyone who really stands out with crazy numbers that we haven't talked about yet. And Bob Atkinson, a catcher, certainly does. Almost off the charts home run power and a lot of durability, but the strikeouts and the lack of contact with mediocre defense probably make him someone that won't be as prominent on my list. Jeff May, center fielder, really good contact, not going to strike out, high work ethic, good bunter, decent speed. Joe Allen Jr. we've talked about. Chris Purvis. We'll take a look and see if there might be any underrated pitchers here for you too. Batting potential and Doesn't look like there's really a pitcher that we would be dying to make a hitter. We can also do the opposite right now. I think this is probably even less likely to generate much of anything that's interesting, although I stand corrected. Hadn't noticed this. Some of you probably did as I was popping through things quickly, but two of the guys that we talked about, Tim Kuhn and Josh Hoffman, both look like they could be potentially two-way players. The stuff for Kuhn looks acceptable. Movement and control, both really good. Only a reliever. Don't know that we put him up all that much on that, but it's certainly interesting. And then Josh Hoffman, take a look at his ratings as a pitcher, and he's a potential three-pitch guy. The stuff, question whether it's really truly major league quality, decent movement and control potentially. He could, in theory, at least be a starter. I don't know that either of these guys is interesting enough as a prospect to make me move them up the draft board, but certainly something that I'll factor in. And if either of them is around at 38, assuming I don't take either at 32, the ability to play both ways could certainly work in their favor. Last but not least, we'll just check in on some of the actual pitchers here that we perhaps haven't seen before. Andy Kutry, potentially excellent stuff as a reliever. Chris Whitaker, he could be someone that we would definitely consider down the line. Only view him as having two-star potential, but he's durable, a ton of positive personality traits. Right now he's just kind of a fastball and a sinker guy, but if you did get lucky and the changeup developed or the curve ended up being better than we thought it could be, he could potentially become a 5-inning type of starter. Again, not someone we would chase, but when we start getting to the middle rounds of the draft, if a guy like him is around, that's certainly potentially interesting for us. So we're definitely going to have some interesting decisions to make in the draft this year. Again, I'll spend a lot more time about it with it offline, and if I find an interesting direction to go, we'll certainly talk about that at the start of the episode. If there's someone that maybe we haven't spent any time with yet, as I mentioned, Garner, Hoffman, Kelsey, and Perkins to me are the 4 position players that are a bit more intriguing at this point. And certainly with Hoffman being a potential two-way guy, that works in his favor. If we were to do a pitcher, I definitely can't see myself doing a reliever here. So I would think that we might go with Mr. Rizzo. You know, there are a few other starters out there. Actually, there's a lot of starters you can see who have 3-star potential here. So I'll be spending time with all of those guys offline. It's very possible that one of them could emerge as someone to consider with the 32nd pick, or more likely with the 38th pick. Or in a perfect world, we might hope that one of them falls to us in the second round. So a lot to think about here. It's been an interesting season thus far for the Buffalo Wings as we sit here on June 21st. Again, 10 games behind in the National League East, but we would be in a wild card spot if the season ended today. Looking at our financial situation, we've got a little bit of money if we want to bring on someone to help us. When we think about the overall season, though, we see our Pythagorean record 4 games better than overall, which would not necessarily put us right back in the division race, but would put us in a much more comfortable position as far as feeling real confident that we're going to end up in a wild card spot and at least be able to play in the playoffs. So feel like hopefully we'll play better in the coming weeks and coming months. And the big question this point on June 21st is whether 13 hits away now from 3,000. Will Deshaun Seifu join that rarefied air of the 3,000 hit club before the All-Star break, or will he have to wait until after that time off in early July before potentially joining the Immortals in the 3,000 hit club? But barring something extremely unforeseen, would expect that it would happen very soon. Until our next episode and the chase for 3,000, hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching, and we'll be back with the draft and Mr. Seifu's chase of 3,000 next time around.